I'm going to share my experience going through post-secondary education in Canada, starting from before I even enrolled all the way up to where I am now, nearly 6 years after graduation. I enrolled at the University of Toronto Scarborough in September 2015, double majoring in Human Biology and Neuroscience, and I graduated in 2019 with my Bachelor of Science. Enrolling at the University of Toronto was the worst mistake of my life. I ended up getting a 2.66 cumulative GPA, didn't get into any professional schools, and didn't end up using my degree. When I was researching universities as a prospective student, I kept hearing stories about students who enrolled at the university, graduated, and then went on to med school or grad school. But what I never heard were the stories of students like myself who got really bad grades, couldn't get into professional school, and had to do something else with their lives. I am making this video to share my experience being one of those students who had hopes and dreams but failed miserably and had to do something else. From the moment I entered 12th grade, people were already asking me where I was going to go to university. At that point in my life, I hadn't even stepped foot on a university campus, and my parents and grandparents hadn't even completed high school, so I was one of the first in my family to pursue post-secondary education. The challenge was that at the age of 18, I hadn't seen much of the world or explored enough careers to actually make an informed decision about what I want to do for the rest of my life. Yet society expected me, an inexperienced 18-year-old with a whole bunch of other stuff going on, to choose a program that would define the next 4 years and change the course of my entire future. I ended up applying for 3 different programs at 3 different universities. So my first choice was medical radiation sciences at McMaster University, second choice was life science at the University of Toronto Scarborough, and my third choice was biomedical science at the University of Waterloo. To give you a better idea of my background before starting university, I'm going to show you a copy of my Ontario student record. So as you can see, I always struggled with math, with the exception being grade 10, but despite this, I was a very disciplined student. I got perfect attendance in 2 out of 4 years of high school, and I attended summer school most years. My average across 6 grade 12 courses was 79.5%, and I suspect part of that may have been because I had a serious case of senioritis, and I was so excited to be able to move out of my mother's house and start a new chapter in my life. My terrible grades in grade 12 math led to McMaster University and the University of Waterloo rejecting my application, and I had to accept my offer from the University of Toronto Scarborough to study life science. And part of the reason why I chose the life science program was because of its cool sounding name, life science. Funnily enough, years later, I chose a second degree with a similarly sounding cool name, cybersecurity and information assurance. I was also on the City of Brantford's Control of Vicious Dogs committee, so yeah, it's still pretty obvious that I make big life decisions based on whether or not it has a cool title associated with it. After I enrolled at the University of Toronto Scarborough, I quickly realized that it was an incredibly competitive and stressful environment. Everybody was looking out for themselves, and while students were polite, they weren't necessarily friendly. It was a pretty cutthroat environment. On top of that, it felt like the exams didn't accurately reflect what was being taught in class. It felt like professors were constantly throwing in vague, ambiguous questions with 2 or more possible answers just to make things harder. Exams were always unnecessarily difficult, and even though I attended every class, I found it hard to succeed. I had a professor in my 4th year tell the entire class that the department lectured her because she gave out too many high marks, and I honestly didn't get why that was such a huge problem. Like, if exams are fair and students are putting in the work, they should be able to get high grades, right? If you ask anybody at the university, they'll deny it, but grade deflation was definitely a thing. There was very little support amongst students, and I spent 4 years constantly stressed about meeting deadlines. The pressure was always on because exams were usually worth 30% or more of your final grade, so if you missed one exam, you were done for. I spent 4 years constantly feeling guilty for doing anything that wasn't studying or completing assignments, so things like eating, sleeping, showering, doing laundry. It was like I couldn't justify taking care of myself because there was always that nagging feeling in the back of my mind that I could be using that time more efficiently. Here is a copy of my academic transcript. As you can see, I basically failed first year physics and calculus. To be fair, the first year physics course started off with 300 students, but a lot of people ended up dropping the course because it was so brutal. I actually left my exam halfway through, leaving most of the questions blank, but they ended up passing everybody anyways because the exam was just so unfair. Because my grades were so terrible, it really limited the number of research opportunities available to me. A lot of them had a minimum GPA requirement, and with my grades, I just didn't qualify. So there are a lot of research opportunities at the university, but they're all extremely competitive to get. Looking at the rest of my transcript, I performed around average much for the rest of my time at university. At some point I stopped caring about my program and just took easy courses just to get by and to get my degree over with. And just looking at the course averages, it's kind of ridiculous. Even if you're an average student at the top university in Canada, you're still not competitive enough for things like medical school or pharmacy or grad school or anything like that. You really have to be the best of the best. And honestly, I wasn't. After I graduated, I felt so ashamed, not because I didn't work as hard as I could have, I worked like a dog, but because I felt like I wasted 4 years of time, energy, and resources on a degree that really didn't get me anywhere. Throughout the 4 years that I spent in university, I never knew what I was going to do with my degree. The reason why I persisted as long as I did, even though I got such awful grades in the first semester of my first year, isn't because I believed in myself, but because I was afraid to admit to myself that I had failed. I didn't want to have to tell my parents that I had failed and that I didn't have a backup plan. I was so ashamed and embarrassed that I didn't even attend my own convocation. It's actually kind of a funny story though. The convocation office will keep a physical copy of your degree for up to a year after you graduate, but because of COVID, they ended up keeping mine until 2021. So I graduated in 2019, but I received an email from them in August of 2021 saying, "Hey, we have your degree. Are you planning to come pick it up anytime soon?" And well, I never went to go pick it up. I started applying for jobs right after I finished my last exam. I applied for about 50 jobs before finally landing my first big boy job with the Government of Canada. I worked as a payment services officer with Employment and Social Development Canada from September 2019 to May 2022. And for those of you who don't know, payment services officer doesn't require a degree, and it is just about the most entry-level job that you could possibly have in government. So in this role, I was responsible for reviewing employment insurance claims, reaching out to claimants and employers, clarifying any discrepancies, and then processing employment insurance claims with accurate info. In May of 2022, I got promoted to program advisor, where I conducted quality checks on finalized employment insurance claims to ensure claimants received the benefits they were entitled to. I did that up until October of 2023 when I quit to travel the world. After that, I went back to school and earned a Bachelor of Science in Cybersecurity and Information Assurance from Western Governors University in August of 2024. In January 2025, I landed an IT service technician position with a managed service provider in Canada, and I've been working in that role ever since. Now, nearly 6 years after graduating from the University of Toronto, I still haven't used my degree or any of the knowledge that I gained while completing it. I did make some friends throughout my time at university, but most of them ended up becoming really embarrassed that they couldn't find jobs related to their degrees, and they just deleted their social media and ghosted all of their friends, including myself. It's absolutely wild how often that happens. Nowadays, I only keep in contact with one of my friends from university, and he wasn't able to use his U of T degree for anything either. I actually cyberstalked one of my friends who ghosted me after graduation, and it turns out he had to go back to school because his U of T degree didn't get him anywhere. He's now completing an Ontario College Advanced Diploma in Computer Programming and Analysis at Seneca, and according to his LinkedIn profile, he's set to graduate in May 2025. So that's another 3 years of his life down the drain. My brother went to U of T for geological science and completed 3 years before he dropped out. He didn't earn his degree and is now working a dead-end job at a local factory. He deleted all his social media, ghosted all his friends, and to this day, he will not answer any questions that we have regarding what his plans are regarding his education or his life. He also took a 5th year in high school, so that's a total of 4 years of his time, energy, and resources down the drain. Anytime I've encountered a University of Toronto student or alumni in the wild, my experience with them has always been negative. For example, I met a guy who told me that he lived in Scarborough and attended the University of Toronto. He didn't explicitly mention which campus he went to, so I asked him, "Do you go to the downtown campus?" And he said that he takes courses there. So I explicitly asked him, "Do you go to UTSC?" And then he literally bowed his head and looked so shamed and disappointed and was like, "Yes." He was embarrassed that he was studying at a satellite campus of one of the top post-secondary institutions in Canada. So then he tried to explain that even though his grades sucked in first year, they eventually got better by his 3rd year. So this guy was very self-conscious. In my previous video, I shared a story about how I stayed at an Airbnb where I caught the host partner staring through the translucent door of my room. I left a bad review and the host defended his partner. I checked out his Airbnb profile and it turns out that the host actually went to U of T as well. In my experience, as a general whole, U of T students and alumni seem to be very self-conscious about their intelligence, and they seem to be going through a lot of serious mental health struggles. I am sharing my my story as a failed pre-med student because I've noticed other people go through similar experiences but not talk about it because they're ashamed or embarrassed. Many people drop out of or graduate from university feeling like they wasted so much time, energy, and money on a worthless degree. I'd like to offer some wisdom that I wish I had heard before, during, and after my time in post-secondary education in Canada. My goal is to provide prospective students with a glimpse of what it's really like, especially from the perspective of somebody who didn't succeed, so that they can make a more informed decision about whether or not to attend the University of Toronto or any brick and mortar university for that matter. To any prospective students, I have the following tips. Tip number 1 is to be optimistic but also realistic about who you are and what you can accomplish. In high school, I got horrible math grades but still decided to take physics and calculus in my first year. This was a mistake that I was never able to recover from, and I did that because I believed in myself. I believed that I'd work hard and I'd get amazing grades, but that obviously didn't end up happening. Your life and study habits aren't going to dramatically change the moment you get to university. So on the one hand, believe in yourself, but on the other hand, be realistic. Tip number 2 is to reach out to current students and alumni and hear about their real experiences. When you're a prospective student, universities will bombard you with stories about students who enrolled and went on to do amazing things. But let's be real, university is first and foremost a business. They will promise you everything and anything just to convince you to enroll there and pay tuition to them for 4 years. Universities will also throw statistics out at you like 90% of our graduates found employment within 6 months, but what they don't tell you is whether or not that employment is related to their degrees or whether or not they're considering volunteer work to be employment. So yeah, take the statistics and testimonials with a huge grain of salt and make sure you're hearing both sides of the story. Tip number 3 is to work on your mental health before you get to university. I came in with a lot of emotional baggage, thinking that things would just magically get better once I was in a new environment. The problem was that I was going from one stressful environment to another, so my mental health problems just got worse. Like I said earlier, university is a very stressful environment and everybody's looking out for themselves. Many students enter university expecting everything to be different. Better grades, new friends, amazing experiences, but when none of that comes to pass, it takes a toll on their mental health and that affects every other aspect of their lives. I got terrible grades, friends who ghosted me after graduation, and the 4 years that I spent in university were easily the most forgettable and boring years of my life. So definitely know how to manage your expectations and your mental health. To people who are currently enrolled in university, here are some tips I have. Tip number 1 is if you're getting the kind of grades I was getting in my first year, consider dropping or transferring out. It is possible to turn things around later on, but it is incredibly tough, and getting even one bad grade will prevent you from getting a 4.0 GPA. So it's important to be optimistic and believe in yourself, but it's just as important to be realistic about what you can handle. Don't think of it as giving up or quitting. Think of it as sparing yourself from years of unnecessary stress and struggle. I thought I could turn things around, and we all know how that turned out for me. I just didn't want to face the consequences of going back home without a clear path forward. And the irony is, I ended up back there anyways, at the age of 28 with a useless degree and thousands in student debt. Tip number 2 is if you're struggling academically, don't be afraid to admit to yourself and your family that university isn't for you. In many cultures, especially Asian ones, education is seen as everything, and dropping out can feel like the ultimate failure. But here's the thing, if you graduate and don't use your degree, your family is eventually going to learn that you didn't succeed after all. If you drop out in your first year, you can spare yourself from 3 years of unnecessary stress, tuition, and wasted time. The sooner you're honest about it, the sooner you can pivot to doing something else that'll actually help you reach your goals in life, whether that's doing a different degree at a different university or going to college or whatever else. Tip number 3 is if you suspect your degree isn't going to lead you anywhere, try to get a student job and maybe even consider double majoring in 2 different fields. That way you're not just gaining work experience for your resume, but you're also building a broad skill set that can help you in a number of careers. I really regret double majoring in human biology and neuroscience and wish I had majored in something like computer science or another field that teaches practical, transferable skills. To anybody who graduated from university and didn't end up where they wanted in life, I have the following tips. Tip number 1 is don't be ashamed if you graduated with a degree that feels useless. I know way too many people who were so ashamed and embarrassed of the amount of time, energy, and resources they invested into getting a useless degree that they deleted all their social media and ghosted all their friends. I was so ashamed I didn't even attend my own convocation. Don't be that person. Be proud that you graduated and that you worked hard with with what you were given. I wasn't the kind of person who could quickly pick up concepts and could quickly learn math. And you can't tell this by looking at my transcript, but I did put in a lot of effort and I did work really hard. And that's something that I'll always be proud of. Tip number 2 is to stop blaming yourself for things that you had no control over. At the age of 18, there's no way that you were in a good position to decide what you wanted to do for the rest of your life. You haven't been exposed to enough careers and life experiences to make an informed choice, and you couldn't have predicted what the economy would look like by the time you graduated. Sure, maybe you made a mistake choosing your program or university, but you were never in a good position to make that call in the first place. If you worked hard but still ended up getting poor grades, don't beat yourself up for it. Blame the universe for giving you the brain that you had, or for putting an inexperienced 18-year-old in charge of deciding your future. Take comfort in the fact that you tried your best with what you had. My third tip is to always be working on yourself and building the life that you really want. Don't get stuck in your first job after graduation. I stayed in my first job for 4 years, and look at me now. I still live with my parents, and I'm only just beginning to build a real career in IT. So don't be like me. For any current students and graduates out there, I want to tell you that life isn't over if you don't get perfect grades or have a useless degree. But the truth is, even 6 years after graduation, I'm still living with my parents, waiting for things to turn around for me. After my experience at the University of Toronto, I developed a pretty negative view of post-secondary education, but all of that changed when I enrolled at Western Governors University. It was a completely different experience. At WGU, I was able to complete courses online and transfer in 64% of the credits towards my degree before enrolling. It is a self-paced, remote university, meaning I could complete as many courses as I wanted, whenever and wherever I wanted. If you complete all the courses of your degree within 6 months, you only pay 1 semester's worth of tuition for a 4-year degree. There are no group assignments, no presentations, just exams and assignments that you can complete on the weekends. You schedule your own exams and work on your own timeline. The best part about WGU is that you don't get traditional grades, so if you score over 70% on an exam or an assignment, you pass, and students who graduate get assigned an automatic 3.0 GPA, so there's no competition whatsoever. And because of this, a lot of students feel comfortable posting helpful guides on Reddit to help other students pass courses more efficiently. I actually completed my degree within 1.5 months, and it was honestly the best post-secondary education experience I could have ever hoped for. Going into university the first time, I didn't feel like I needed that flexibility or the support of the community, but honestly, you don't know what you're missing out on until you experience something different. My last piece of advice for anybody considering university or currently enrolled in it is don't be afraid to consider other options. You don't have to force yourself through the traditional brick and mortar university grind if it isn't working for you. There's so many different pathways to success, and university isn't the only way to get there. Take some time to think about why you wanted to go to university in the first place. In my case, I wanted to become a doctor because I wanted to earn a lot of money and help people, but it turns out that there were other more affordable ways to achieve that without drowning in student debt. And those are all the reasons why graduating from the University of Toronto ended up being the biggest mistake of my life. If I could, I'd erase the memories of my time there entirely. I think being in that stressful, hyper-competitive environment for so long left me in a perpetual state of bitterness. I am releasing this video on my 28th birthday. And when I blow out the candles of this cheap vanilla grocery store cake, my hope will be that this video helped at least one person feel more confident in the decisions they've made or will make.